Hi guys, it's Kelly Lenovola here and I'm back with another video for Tonic Studios. Today I am playing with some stuff from our new Garden Party release, which I am totally in love with. These are the Peony Bloom stamp set, and then the sentiments that I'm going to be using is Celebrate Sentiments. And so it's got a bunch that are just really good sentiments for all different kinds of things, and then it has some just general ones, and I'm going to be using one of the general ones today. So I picked out two of the largest blooms because it's not, I don't know, something happened in stamping where large flowers weren't super popular there for a while. So it's been quite some time since I got to just color a really big, beautiful flower. And so I wanted to do that. I am stamping on watercolor paper. It's really, really necessary to do that, even though here, like, I have to stamp twice because the paper is more textured on watercolor paper. Still worth it. So I'm going to cut a mask for this as well because my bouquet is going to be one layer. But very early on in stamping, I tried to, because I'm cheap, you guys know this about me. That hasn't changed. And so I tried to just watercolor on regular cardstock, and it's just not feasible, guys. It's not, well, I mean, it will work, but it will not look like the other watercolor that you see. Watercolor paper is made specifically to allow the ink and the water to sit on top, so they flow really beautifully together. Regular cardstock is made to absorb moisture, and consequently the blending is not the same. Your paper will warp. It's just not meant to hold that kind of moisture. So if you find that you're getting results that you don't love, maybe check to make sure that the paper you're using is the correct one for whatever technique you're trying to do. So here I stamped the large peony, and then I've stamped another slightly smaller one, which I'm going to be honest is still a pretty good size flower. I'm working on a 6 by, what is it, 4 3/4, 6 by 4 1/2 piece of watercolor cardstock. Yes, that's bigger than an A2 size card. I know that. But I didn't know what part of it I was going to like the best. And so I like having a little bit of extra around it for the card design. That way I can trim it out how I want to later. So here I've masked both the flowers, and now I'm going ahead and stamping the leaves. I'm doing kind of like a triangle with the leaves. Now there aren't going to be as many in some areas as there are in others, but that's totally okay. It's just to get a little bit of color all around my flower for the watercolor portion of it that I'm doing. For the watercolor portion of it that I'm doing, oh, here's the reveal. Ta-da! Okay. I'm actually going to be using the Nuvo Aqua Flow pens. These are similar to other things that are on the market. I really like them. And they come in sets. So I'm using the Winter Skies, Autumn Woodland, and Arabian Nights. They're all kind of like colors that are complementary to each other. I put down a little bit of brown in the center of the flower and then spread that around with the yellow. Now I am going to be using them with water, but you don't have to. They are made to work just the way they are right now. So you could really just sit down and color, quote unquote color with these the same way you would with any other medium, with markers or watercolors or any of those. But I don't want to do that. I want to watercolor. So here I'm just giving a really good coat of, this is the lightest one in the Arabian Nights. This is the Wild Fox. Well, it's spelled Phlox, and you know how I am with enunciation, so you tell me what it says. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to add some, the darker purple, which is Indigo Dawn, and then a little bit of red, which is French Wine. Now, don't be afraid to layer your colors. As long as they're all colors that will mix well together, i.e. not complementary colors. A complementary color is a color that's opposite on the color wheel. These colors are what we would call analogous colors. So they all sit next to each other, a violet, a red violet, and a red, and they'll be totally fine. Now, watercoloring. The color will only go as far as the paper is wet. So I like to put down a little barrier. That's what I'm doing here. This is just clean water. I'm outlining my flowers as far as I want my pigment to go, because I don't want it to eat up all of my white space, but I do want it to be flowy and pretty and create its own organic edges. And then once I've put that down, and make sure it stays wet, double check that all the areas are wet, then I'm just going to take my paintbrush and I'm just going to go right over top of all of that color. And then I'm going to connect it to that boundary and I'm going to let the water do the work. This is by far and away the hardest part of watercoloring because all of us, well, I shouldn't say all of us, the majority of us have a little bit of perfectionist in us. And watercolor typically looks hideous until it doesn't. Like, that's just kind of the way watercolor works. And it kind of forces you to let go of that control. So if you start to get some edges that you don't really love, you'll see here in just a little bit, I wanted to make sure that yellow was blended in, that I'm going to blot up some of the color, which is totally fine. You can do that. While it's wet, you can pick up some color or some water that maybe you don't love. And then I'm going to go back in with some clean water and put that down at the very edge, just to kind of break up the, like the line, the boundary line there, because I don't like when they're super smooth. I like when they look really organic. So then after I'm done with this, I'm going to go in with my greens and yellows. Now, my flower is still damp because I do want my greens to kind of infiltrate that purple a little bit, and I also want the purple to kind of infiltrate the greens. If you don't want them mixing at all, make sure you wait until your flowers are completely dry. For me, because I wanted them to mix a little, I was totally cool with them just doing their thing. Also, I'm using them as quote unquote a marker to blend this green into this yellow. Now you may notice that your yellow starts to pick up some green on your marker. That will happen. The bristles will kind of absorb the green, but don't worry about it. I just scribble mine off on my mat, or you could use a scrap piece of paper and then it will return back to yellow. You'll see a good example of that when I do the one in the top left up here, where you just scribble it off and then it goes back to yellow as that pigment's flowing out. It will kind of flush out the green, but it's a really good way to mix colors if you don't have a mid-tone. And in this case, I don't. The Autumn Woodland is a yellow, a green, and a brown. So here, now all of that is done. I'm going to go do the same thing with the leaves that I did with the petals. So I'm going to outline them, create that boundary, and then I'll go over where the color is and just kind of let it bloom out into the background. Now, I taught this type of card once in a class, and I asked some of the people who were kind of painting inside the lines, do you think this type of card is pretty? And because crafters are so sweet and they are so nice, like most of them did not want to hurt my feelings. And I was like, listen, everybody has different things that they find attractive. And for some people, a messy, a quote unquote messy watercolor look where the colors are bleeding out from behind isn't something that they love. And if that's you, that's okay. You can paint them in perfectly. You can still do the technique of mixing the alcohol markers with your watercoloring, and it will still be beneficial because we're putting down this base layer of color, which is going to be, it's not like a completely smooth coverage like you would get with a marker. You're going to have different variations of color, and that's kind of the point. That's kind of the purpose of starting with that base, also in addition to them kind of bleeding out, which I think looks really cool, kind of like the flowers like washing away in the rain, but not everybody loves that look, and that's okay. You can still do the watercoloring as your base, what they call underpainting, and still put the markers on top and get a really cool look. So here, I wanted my flower to be a little bit more blue-violet, so I went in with the, now wait, I'm not going to remember what it is. It's hard. There's a lot of names, y'all. Azure blue? I'm sure I said that wrong. Anyway, and so I did put that back in, and then I'm going to go in and add more purple as well, just to get a more blue-violet color. But I still love how some of those petals, you know, have that true pink or, you know, red undertone. And colors for me is like the best part. Colors is the best part of card making for me. I just love mixing colors and, you know, really bright, bold colors, seeing how they work together. So that's why, for me, this technique is kind of one of my go-tos. It's interesting to see which ones will or will not work together. So anywho, after this, what am I doing? After this, this should be just about the last portion of the painting. I think I'm going to be pretty happy with the way it looks after adding in that blue. And I know it looks a little bit harsh right now, but you have to remember everything's wet. And with watercolor, you have to wait till it's dry before you decide if you like it. That's just, it is what it is. So here I am done. I've waited for it to dry. And now I have this glitter, it's called Midas Gold. And it is one of the new Aqua shimmers. And so I've squeezed out a little bit, and then I am going to spatter this on the background. These colors just seemed like gold would be a good accent color for them. And then I loaded up the center of the flower with the gold. But I didn't do it while it was wet. I had to wait till it was dry because otherwise the gold would have spread throughout the entire flower. So if you want that, if you want the glitter in your water, which is totally cool, then you can do it when it's wet. But because I wanted it just to be spatters on top of the flowers and on top of my background, I waited for it to be dry. Once everything's dry, make sure it's all dry. You can then go in with your Nuvo alcohol markers and start to add some shading. So any point where two objects meet or any point where one object lays on top of another, you're going to have shadows. Typically, I start lightest to darkest, darkest to lightest, but because I already have that color down, I feel a lot more comfortable going in with my darkest color. I did kind of cheat a little bit because I pulled some colors from different sets. So Nuvo markers come in sets. Because I had a blue violet going on here, I actually pulled my navy, the darkest color I'm using now, from the indigo ink set, but then the other two are from the Palma violets. For the greens I used, those are all three. That is the complete set of woodland greens. So if you have a couple of different sets, don't be afraid to take one from here, take one from there, and see what works for you. I just needed a super dark blue to do my shading because of how dark or how bold I made the watercolor. And that's just my personal preference because I think it looks amazing. I love bold color. So as far as like my life, this card's actually going to go to one of my youth group kids. So as you guys well know, if you've been watching my channel, my police station youth group has been in a running for a grant. We were kind of stuck in the 60s, even though all of you guys, which are wonderful, thank you so much for voting and your support, and you're awesome, and I love you. Even though we had all of these people who were supporting us, I don't think we're going to break the top 40. We were hovering in the 60s pretty much the whole time, which isn't bad because we're in the 60s out of 200. It's not like we were doing poorly or we didn't have a lot of support. I don't believe we had enough to break the 40. Now we won't find out until September 25th, but at this juncture, the voting is closed. So, but before the voting was closed, one of the youth group kids' mom apparently is friends with somebody at Channel 3 here in Cleveland. And so she had contacted her and was like, hey, could you put this out on Facebook? We're trying to get support for this grant. And the lady that she talked to at the news was like, oh, no, we're going to bring them on TV. Yes, I said that. We're going to bring them on TV. So, Eric calls me and he's like, the chief called. No, he texted me. I'm sorry. He texted me and said the chief called me and they want to do a segment on the news. Any interest in going with me? And I was like, the live news? And he said, yes. And I was like, nah, fam, I'm gonna pass. And then he pulls, guys know, don't they? He pulls the relationship card. Baby, don't make me do this alone. Right? Come on. So I'm like, man, I really don't want to do this. I have to get a sitter for Peanut if I do it, and I don't want to. So then the next day, I don't really like a bunch of people looking at me. That's just the reality of it. I know it probably seems weird because I'm on YouTube and I'm talking to all of these people, but it's different because I'm used to sitting behind a microphone because I'm dispatched for, the last 15 years of my life. So being behind a microphone is not weird to me because I'm used to talking to people who aren't here in my room, but are people that are out there in the world. Typically those people are cops, but now they're you. So anyway, so my chief was like, I think you should do it. And I was like, but I don't really want to. And he was like, but I think you should. Like, you guys were in it together, and you should. And so basically, without saying, like, you're doing this, he was basically, his voice inflection was saying, you're doing this. So, I go to work, because, I mean, everybody's got to work, right? So I go to work. I work from 8 to 4. I leave there at 4. I drive, and I live 30 minutes away from where I work, 25-ish. And so I drive to Peanut's dad's house. I pick him up, and then I drive to pick up the babysitter. I drop both of them back off at the house, and then I turn around and have to go back to work. I was driving for whatever that was, an hour and a half. I was doing nothing but driving. So I get back to the police station. Eric is waiting for me in the lot in the cruiser because we're trying to drive downtown in rush hour traffic, which is a nightmare. I mean, it doesn't matter where you live. You all know what downtown traffic looks like. And so we get down there, and the family that had originally contacted them, their son is also going on with us. He's one of our youth group kids. And God love this child. He is one of the shyest youth group kids that we have. And even his mom was like, you want my kid to go on TV? Like, are you sure? Are you sure you're sure? So he and I were super nervous. Eric's like totally chill. Like, he goes on TV every day. Like, this is no big deal. So we walk in, we have to sign in. They take us into this green room, literally green. In fact, the guy who introduced us to the room was like, I feel like it's kind of violent. It was neon green in there, y'all. It was very bright, but very nice. Everybody there was super nice. And so we were sitting there waiting in this room, just talking amongst ourselves. And the whole time, like, my anxiety is building. We're trying to talk to our youth group kid about, what he's going to say, about youth group, about PACT. And, side note, back to the card. So I'm outlining everything. And this, especially with watercolor paper, because it is sometimes hard to get a bold impression, is something that I always do. And then I'm going to do the banner. So I'm going to stamp it in the same black shadow ink, and then add some shading with my grays, and then trim it out, fussy cut it, and do the brush script pen around the back because it's water-based and it won't bleed into my image. So anyway, they finally walk us into like the studio, and it looks strange because there's like 5 different studios. Well, it's all one studio, but there's like 5 different subsections. So there's like a kitchen, there's a couch, there's like some cupboards. It looks crazy. They walk us over to the couch, mic us up, and then like I'm just sitting there, like just waiting, getting more and more anxious, and nobody. Like we had the camera guy and somebody else, and they were both very nice. Everybody there was amazing. And so we're waiting. Well, the worst part is the waiting. Come on. The worst part is the waiting. So we're, chit-chatting amongst ourselves, and like I figure like he's going to come in, and I don't even know because I don't watch football, but apparently Jim Donovan is like the voice of all the Browns games, and he's the guy who's interviewing us. I don't know because I don't like football. That's honest. I just don't like it. So Eric was like, you probably didn't even know that's who that was, did you? And I was like, no, I'm sure my dad will be excited that I met him because he loves football, but I am not. Sorry, I'm not. So I thought we'd get to meet him beforehand or maybe talk about some questions because it's going to be live television on the news. And that's not how it went down at all. So they were like, okay, like you're up after the next commercial. Jim walks in, he sits down on the couch. Hi, nice to meet you. Looks at me and says, how do you say your last name? Which is no big surprise. Most people don't know how to pronounce Lativola. And so I tell him, and then, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds later, he's like, okay, you guys ready? And then we're on the news. Then it's happening. It's totally happening. And like my heart's in my throat, and it's pounding 1 million seconds per minute. And Logan did amazing. Our youth group kid, he did so awesome. Even though I know he was super nervous, because I know I was super nervous. And then, like, the whole thing lasted 2 minutes for all of that anxiety and build up. The whole thing lasted, like, 2 minutes, and then it was over. that was it. But then they offered to give us like a tour of the studio, and we got to watch the weather live from like in the studio room, which was cool. You just had to be quiet because obviously live television. But yeah, that was my TV debut. Probably the only time I'll ever be on TV again. But I would not. 0 stars, would not recommend. No, everybody was really nice, but I'm too anxiety ridden for that stuff. And I suppose if you do it all the time, it probably is not a big deal. But when you're just one random person who works at a police station and doesn't really want to go on TV, but just really wants money to support like the programming for youth group and, you know, seniors and stuff in the community, like it's worth it. You do what you have to do. So I wouldn't change it, but I like wouldn't want to do it again either. I'd probably be forced to do it again because I was forced to do it the first time. But anyway, so I was talking about the fussy cutting here, and then I'm just going to go around that. So yeah, I mean, I really think, I don't think that we're going to breach the 40, but that's okay because it was a wonderful experience to see how many people who were willing to support us. So here, now that it's all trimmed out, I'm just going to pop some foam up on the back of it. I love the way this banner is drawn because you could do it straight, you can do it sideways, you can do it all different kinds of ways, and I think that it's super pretty. And so I'm going to cock mine a little to the side. And then that's pretty much it. Outside of, I did go in with just a clear glitter pen and add that to just the petals that were curled up. Just, you know, for a little extra bling bling. But then that's it. That's the whole card. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.